We finally know more details about the origin of the serial killer Longlegs and why he is the way that he is. Apparently, Longlegs was a glam rocker in the 70s and 80s. At some point during this time period, the devil's influence comes over him and recruits him to his cause. But this explains why Longlegs looks the way that he does. He has gone through several botched plastic surgeries in order to make himself look prettier for the devil. This really makes sense with all of the outfits that Longlegs wears, as well as his singing choices throughout the film. Speaking of singing, during the film after Longlegs has been arrested, they play a tape for Lee of Longlegs during an interrogation where he sings happy birthday to her. They cut off the tape and say that it goes on for like another 20-something minutes. But did you know that that is like based in reality? Nicolas Cage actually did just go on performing for over 25 minutes and they did not stop him. They just kept rolling the entire time, but they did not include the entire thing in the film. I'm really hoping we get like the Nicolas Cage insane singing cut like in the DVD release of the movie. And I don't know, I think the idea of Longlegs being a glam rocker who kind of lost his mind and sold his soul to the devil and all this is really interesting, with the theory that he is also Lee Harker's biological father. We also know why he was called Longlegs. We finally got some confirmation on where this name came from. Basically, the director and writer just thought it sounded interesting. He said it wasn't based in anything else besides when he thought of it, he was like, that would be a good name for a serial killer. So this one is psychologically disturbing and pretty fucked up, so be warned, let's do it. We need to talk about Kevin opens up by introducing us to our main character, Eva. We see that Eva lives in this kind of rundown house by herself, and everybody in her neighborhood and around her is really hostile towards her. She has paint thrown at her house and her car all the time. A woman comes up to her and straight up slaps her in the face on the street. She's harassed in the supermarket. We learn that she regularly goes to visit her son Kevin in prison. So this movie is told in a non-linear fashion because it jumps between present times of Eva living by herself and flashbacks of her with her family, specifically raising Kevin and how everything came to be and what he did. So we get 4 stages of Kevin: baby Kevin, toddler Kevin, school-aged Kevin, and teenage Kevin. Through flashbacks, we saw how Eva met her husband Franklin, and the two of them had a baby boy named Kevin. You can kind of tell immediately that Eva and Kevin didn't really bond. She used to live a really spontaneous, fun life, and she gave that up to have a baby, and she's kind of resentful for it. When Kevin's a baby, it seems he only cries when she's around. He's totally fine with Franklin. As he gets older, he refuses to speak or learn to be potty trained. He purposely destroys Eva's things that she cares about and just seems to antagonize her constantly. But when Franklin is around, Kevin is totally fine, so he thinks that Eva is exaggerating. One day when Kevin is school age, he's still wearing diapers, and Eva changes his diaper, and then he purposely defecates to make her change it again. He's just constantly provoking her like this, and out of frustration, she like throws him and breaks his arm by accident. When Franklin asks what happened, Kevin covers for Eva and says that he fell, which of course he's doing as a way to manipulate her. So we see that this kid has some psychopathic tendencies from an early age. Franklin, again, never sees any of Kevin's negative behavior, and one day when he's a kid, he gifts him this toy bow and arrow. Now, back in present times, Eva is still struggling. Her coworkers are super fucking rude to her. And we've kind of gathered that Kevin's crime was a school shooting because she's being approached by certain students and certain parents of students who died. So as the movie goes on, we're kind of putting the pieces together. Through flashbacks, we see that Eva got pregnant again, and this time she had a daughter named Celia. And Kevin is just automatically fucking awful and hostile to her. One day we see that Kevin puts Celia's pet guinea pig in the garbage disposal and fucking kills it. And one day when Kevin is supposed to be babysitting Celia, she has an incident with this drain cleaner chemical and she loses her eye permanently. So Eva starts to think that Kevin hurt his sister on purpose, and we can tell that he is getting increasingly more disturbed. Like, this part's fucked up. There's one day that Eva walks in on Kevin jerking it, and instead of like stopping like a normal teenager would, he deadass just makes eye contact with her and continues. Through these years, Eva continuously tries to tell Franklin like there is something wrong with Kevin, he is not well. But Franklin keeps brushing it off, keeps thinking that she's just being dramatic. And eventually, because of it, the two of them decide to get divorced. And Kevin overhears this conversation while they're talking about it. One day we see that Kevin gets some packages delivered to the house, and it's a bunch of bicycle locks, like more than one person would ever need. And when Franklin asks him about it, he's like, oh, I'm just flipping them and selling them for profit at school. And Franklin's like, oh, my little entrepreneur. Like, Franklin, please. The red flags are flagging. At this point, we've also learned that Kevin has taken his archery hobby that he developed as a kid and has become really fucking good at it. And Franklin gifted him this like really fancy crossbow for Christmas. So So a few days before his 16th birthday, it's the morning and Kevin is getting ready to go to school. Again, at this point, we can just tell he's incredibly disturbed. He's in his room just trying to work himself up. Eva notices something wrong with him and is like, you look a little clammy, like, are you okay? He says he's fine and she leaves to go to work. We see Kevin go to school and lock all the gymnasium doors with the bike locks. And Eva gets a call at work telling her that there is an active shooter at her son's school. She gets there and it's absolute chaos and we see kids being wheeled out on stretchers with arrows in them. And sure enough, Eva watches as her son comes out with his hands up, revealing that he is the one that did all of this. During this flashback, we also see parents outside of the school crying over their dead children, and some of those parents are the people that have been harassing Eva in present time, so now we understand why. We never learn how many people Kevin killed, but we see multiple bodies being taken away as he's put in the police car. Eva this whole time has been trying to contact Franklin and he's not answering. And she gets home and discovers that he's not answering because Kevin has also killed him and Celia. And they're dead in the backyard with arrows in them as well. Back in present times, we see that Eva once again goes to visit Kevin in prison. It's the 2nd anniversary of the massacre, which also means that it's about to be Kevin's 18th birthday. So he's going to a real prison because right now he's in a juvenile facility. And while this whole time he has been almost like calm and cool and collected, he now seems really different. He's scared. And it's because he's nervous about going to this adult prison. Eva looks at him and finally asks him, I need to know why. And Kevin just looks at her scared and says, I used to think I knew, but I'm not sure anymore. Eva hugs him, and for the first time, he truly embraces his mother like he loves her, and she leaves, and the movie ends.
The story of Bjerk's stalker. The Hollywood, Florida police are in a very tricky situation. They're dealing with both a dead, decomposing body, and they have about 20 hours of footage that they need to go through. They need to watch 20 hours of footage to understand the full picture of what has even taken place here. It was such a bizarre call. They rushed out to this small apartment complex. They found a man dead in his apartment, completely nude. His face was painted this very grotesque green-red color, almost striped. Striped green and red fully. He looked like he was wearing a mask. He didn't even look human. The entire apartment is a mess, like a hoarding situation. The only thing that stood out immediately to them, well, it's pretty unavoidable. Someone wanted them to find it. On the wall, above the dead body, written in giant painted letters, it's taken up the whole wall, the entirety of the wall. It reads, "The 8mm tapes are a documentation of a crime, a terrorist matter. They are for the FBI." And it had an arrow pointing to a stack of tapes.
Is that the 20 hours?
Yes. So if anything is going to help them figure out exactly what happened to this dead person, it's going to be the tapes. It's not something that they can let linger or wait for a designated task force. One of the tapes is even titled "The Last Day." They insert the tape and press play. The man's death is entirely caught on camera from start to finish, from him heavy breathing before his violent end, and even afterwards he lets out this kind of gasp of air, but it sounds like someone gurgling mouthwash. And they just watch him die right there on the screen. Okay, we'll start rewinding the tape. They start rewinding the tape to right before he dies. And right before he dies, he had ripped the pages out of a book to make this little empty space, like a hidden compartment inside of a book. And inside of it, he had placed a bomb. He video logs that he plans on sending this book bomb, to one of the most well-known female celebrities in the entire world, straight to her home address. They see the dead man, Ricardo, before his passing, taking the bomb and going to the post office and shipping it. Successfully. He ships it all the way to England, London, where the singer has a home.
I better hurry up and go now. I want to go now. I want to go now. I want to go now.
They rushed to call Scotland Yard, which is the FBI of England. The package had already arrived in a small post office in South London, and it was about to be dispatched and delivered to the singer's address, but they caught it. Even though the acid bomb was intercepted, it did not physically hurt anyone. I'm sure the harm was done to Bjerk and her team. She made a public statement afterwards where she stated, "I was very upset that somebody had died. I couldn't sleep for a week, and I'd be lying if I said it didn't scare the out of me, that I could get hurt, and most of all that my son could get hurt." But she still sent flowers to Ricardo's family because they too lost someone special.
Well, it's just kind of a very sad thing, obviously when somebody shoots their face off, it's terrible.
These two found footage movies are so fucked up and brutal, I love them with my entire heart. Of course, I'm talking about Slasher Victim 666's absolute masterpiece, Real, and the even more brutal sequel, Real 2. I will shove this movie in anybody's face that says there's no creative and original horror movies being made today, because the world of Real is just so creative and masterfully thought out, it's insane. But on that same note, is this movie gonna leave you questioning that if this is actually real, should you be watching this? Is the last 20 minutes of this film just relentless, brutal gore? The answer is yes across the board. So in short, we follow Slasher Victim 666. He's a part of a family of directors. Slasher Victim is set out to be greatest director ever. He's a big fan of this YouTube guy named Todd Smith, which in case you were wondering, this is Todd Smith. This is his actual YouTube channel that you can go look at right now. And without spoiling anything, there is a point in Real where you realize as the audience, Todd Smith is fucked. How this entire world and movie is just crafted is just pure brilliance. So if you can stomach some very realistic practical special effects gore, I highly recommend you jump into Real. But Slasher Victim doesn't stop there. He then puts out Real 2. And in short, Real 2 is Slasher Victim 666 critiquing himself, saying that his debut film didn't do very well because he didn't have a woman star. So Real 2 is him finding that woman star for his next film, and oddly enough, this becomes a very emotional kind of like love story, which is entirely fucked to say because this movie is more brutal than the first. I will say again, if you are a fan of brutal horror films and found footage, you definitely have to give Real and Real 2 a watch, because although brutal as fuck, these things are brilliant.
This is simply the best prayer you can say against evil plans of the enemy. Pay close attention and stay until the end of the video. Save it and memorize it, because it has the power of winning every battle against your toughest enemy and bring you closer to light. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, I come before you today to pray against the evil plans of the enemy. Your word says that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Lord, I ask that you cancel every evil plan of the enemy that is designed to harm me or those around me. I pray that you would expose every scheme, plot, and plan that the enemy has set in motion. May every assignment of the enemy against me and my loved ones be nullified and rendered powerless in the name of Jesus. I ask that you surround me with your protection and that you send your angels to watch over me and my loved ones. Let your light shine in the darkness and reveal every hidden thing. I pray that you would grant me wisdom and discernment to recognize and avoid the traps of the enemy. Lord, I thank you that you are greater than any evil force that may come against me. Your word says that no weapon formed against me shall prosper. I declare that every tongue that rises against me in judgment shall be condemned. I trust in your unfailing love and your perfect plan for my life. Thank you for hearing my prayer and for your faithfulness to protect and provide for me. In Jesus' name, I pray. Amen. If you've made it this far, share this video with your closest people. Stay with God. Amen.
Evil Teens Rotting in Prison in 2024, Part 19. On September 13, 2020, the Rod family was sleeping when gunmen fired over 50 shots into their Harris County home. The men were targeting 15-year-old Colson for an alleged robbery he was involved in. But instead, they hit his 20-year-old sister, Sierra. She died as a result of her wounds. The siblings' parents were also in the home but were not harmed. Witnesses reported seeing several vehicles, including a red truck, fleeing the scene. Moments after the shooting, authorities spotted a red truck, and they made contact with 18-year-old Emma Pressler. She was arrested and charged with murder. When Pressler went to court days later, the charges were dismissed. The judge said there wasn't enough probable cause to charge her. He stated, "Just because I drive a red truck doesn't mean I'm involved in a murder." Less than a year later, she was back in the news. Just after 10 p.m. on August 6, 2021, 33-year-old Devin Graham and 26-year-old Carissa Lindros were in their home with a friend. Reports indicate Emma Pressler and an unknown man came over, and after an argument, Pressler grabbed gasoline from the home's garage, poured it on Graham and Lindros, then set them on fire before fleeing. The couple escaped the house and were taken to the hospital. Graham had burns covering 90% of his body. He succumbed to his injuries days later. Lindros had burns covering 50% of her body and survived but with life-changing injuries. Lindros identified Pressler as she had known her for over a year. Pressler was arrested and charged with capital murder and several other charges. She was facing death. In 2024, she pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated assault. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. She will be eligible for parole in 2036. The man who was with her at the time of the crime was never apprehended. No motive for the crime was ever revealed.
Here are 5 of the scariest found footage horror movies for you to watch on your next movie night. Now before we get into that, if you love all things horror, all things spooky just as much as I do, be sure to hit that follow button. Incantation follows a woman who is cursed after breaking a religious taboo, and years later, she must now protect her daughter from the consequences of her actions. This is a foreign horror movie. We already know that foreign horror movies can get scary as hell. The movie does get graphic at times. It's definitely something you want to watch late at night. Check it out on Netflix. Leaving DC follows a man who relocates to the wilderness and he starts to videotape his experience out there, and he soon realizes that he is not alone and that something or someone has their eyes on him and they're not after him. This one looks and feels extremely real, so it has that real life terrifying feel to it. It makes you wonder if something like this could actually happen. Check it out on Prime Video. It then follows a young woman who studies the habits of online web users. So you know, she meets with people online, she interacts with them, all that fun stuff. But all that fun would soon come to an end when she witnesses an online murder and she becomes the killer's next target. So she has to do whatever she has to do to evade the killer and to convince anyone that he is in fact real and after her. So it's super thrilling and it's gonna have you on the edge of your seat. It's also available on Prime Video. The Medium follows a shaman who realizes that his nephew has just been possessed. There's a goddess that appears to him. He has to figure out a way to save his nephew's soul. Things get wicked. This movie is more on the fantasy side. This is also a foreign horror movie. This is a good one and it's available to watch on Shudder. Exhibit A follows a man who commits an act that's so unimaginable, and a video camera records the terrifying events that transpire into him doing so. It gets pretty terrifying and dark in this movie as well. Again, it has that raw, realistic feel to it. It's something you truly couldn't imagine anyone to do. Check this one out as well on Prime Video.
The first angel sounded his trumpet. And there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down on the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, a third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea perished, and a third of the ships were destroyed. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on a third of the rivers and on the springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. A third of the waters turned bitter, and many people passed away from the waters that had become bitter. The fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, and a third of the stars, so that a third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss, and out of the smoke, locusts came down on the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were told not to harm the grass of the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of God on their foreheads. They were not allowed to take their lives. They were only allowed to torment them for 5 months, and the agony they suffered was like that of the sting of a scorpion when it strikes. During those days people will seek death but will not find it. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold, and their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like women's hair, and their teeth were like lions' teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails with stingers like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek is Apollyon, that is, destroyer. Since we already discussed the sixth trumpet, I will jump right into what the seventh trumpet will bring. The seventh angel sounded his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven which said, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever." And the 24 elders who were seated on their thrones before God fell on their faces and worshipped God, saying, "We give thanks to you, Lord God Almighty, the one who is and who was, because you have taken your great power and have begun to reign. The nations were angry, and your wrath has come. The time has come for judging the dead, and for rewarding your servants the prophets and your people who revere your name, both great and small, and for destroying those who destroy the earth." Then God's temple in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm.
Released this week and where to watch them. First up is The Funeral. You can stream this on Screenbox or for free on Hoopla. In this Turkish film, we follow a hearse driver. He's tasked with transporting a dead woman, but he starts to hear noises coming from her casket, and realizing she's undead, he becomes mesmerized by her, and this sparks a very strange, deadly relationship. Out Come the Wolves. You can rent this on video on demand. It's about a group of friends who are out on a hunting trip when suddenly they are being hunted by this pack of wolves. It's brought to us by the same writer and director as the very grisly movie Backcountry. Afraid, you can watch this one in theaters. A family is testing out a new AI system for the husband's job, and while it seems absolutely life-changing at first, it starts to take a very menacing turn. And lastly, The Deliverance. You can stream this on Netflix. A family living in a home in Indiana discovers strange demonic occurrences that convince them and their community the house is a portal to hell. This is based on the true story of LaToya Ammons. Be sure to follow to keep up with all horror movie releases, and because I'm watching every horror movie of 2024, I will have reviews for all of these movies listed in this video up very soon.
Crimes Committed by Evil Wives, Part 18. 34-year-old Clara Suarez married 34-year-old David Lynn Harris on February 14, 1992, in Houston, Texas. David had a daughter from a previous marriage, and the couple had twin sons in 1998. The couple ran several successful dentist offices when they weren't caring for their children. At some point during their marriage, David started a relationship with his former secretary, Gail Bridges. Clara became suspicious and hired a private eye to follow her husband. On July 24, 2002, the investigator informed her that David was at a nearby hotel with Bridges. Clara and David's 16-year-old daughter went to the property. In the lobby, David's daughter assaulted him for betraying her stepmom, while Clara argued with her husband and his mistress and physically attacked them. The hotel employees got involved and escorted Clara and David's daughter outside, but they didn't leave. They waited in the parking lot. As David walked Bridges to her vehicle, Clara rammed him with her Mercedes-Benz, causing him to fly 25 feet. She then drove over several medians and ran him over 3 more times. She finished him off by reversing the car and leaving it parked on top of him. She did all this as David's daughter sat helpless in the passenger seat. Clara was arrested at the scene and charged with murder. At her trial a year later, her defense argued it was a crime of passion and said she only ran David over once. However, the private investigator she hired recorded the incident, and the video was played in court. On February 14, 2003, which would have been her and David's 11th wedding anniversary, she was convicted of sudden passion murder and sentenced to a maximum of 20 years in prison. She was eligible for parole in 2013 and 2016, but she was denied both times. She was released on parole in 2018 after serving 15 years.
This intern sent her auntie a mysterious message saying she had something important to tell her. Then she vanished into thin air. So who took her and what was the important message? Chandra Levy grew up in California in the 1970s. She was ambitious from a young age and was a great leader. She always knew she wanted a career in either law or in the FBI. In 2000, she moved to Washington, D.C. to pursue a career. She had landed herself an internship with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Everyone thought that this was going to be the start of a long and successful career for Chandra, but unfortunately she wouldn't make it out alive. It wasn't long before Chandra started telling her close friends that she'd started dating a congressman. This was Gary Condit. Now, he was actually married and was much older than Chandra. In April 2001, Chandra completed her internship and was due to graduate. It was then that she called her auntie Zamsky. She got through to her answer phone and left an ominous message. It said she had something important to tell her. A few days later, though, before that something was revealed, she vanished. On the 5th of May, Chandra's dad rang police. He was really worried as he hadn't heard from her in days, which was strange because she was due to fly home. Her dad also told police that she may have been dating Gary. Officers showed up to Chandra's apartment where she had a house phone that stored answer phone messages. There were 2 off Gary asking where she was. Interestingly, her laptop showed that she had been searching for hiking trails and also airlines. Gary was actually brought in by police for questioning, and he did admit to them that he had been dating her. He did, though, say that he had no reason to want to harm her in any way. The investigations continued and searches were completely fruitless. Then, though, a huge tragedy took place in America, the 9/11 attacks. Unfortunately for Chandra and her family in the investigation, this really overshadowed the work that was being done. Everything seemed to slow down. That was until 2002 when a dog walker made a grim discovery. Human remains were in Rock Creek Park. It was determined via dental records that this was Chandra. Her bra, a Walkman, and trainers were also recovered. Her joggers were also found, which had knots tied at the bottom, which some people believe may mean she was restrained. Now, a small amount of DNA was found on her body, and this was obviously collected by police. They deemed the case to be a homicide. They started looking into potential suspects and came across a man named Ingmar. He'd spent time in prison for assaulting women in Rock Creek Park. It transpired that the day Chandra vanished, he had actually not showed up at work. However, the DNA found on Chandra didn't match him. In 2009, though, he was charged with Chandra's murder, and the following year he was found guilty. He was given 60 years in prison. However, there was a final heartbreaking twist in this case. Ingmar actually got a retrial due to issues with the reliability of one witness. The charges were dismissed and he was released. To this day, Chandra's case remains officially unsolved. A psychic chillingly predicted this woman's mysterious death years before it happened. Was this a cold-blooded murder, and was someone hiding the truth? Natalie Wood was destined to be a superstar from a young age. She lived in San Francisco, and her mum Maria was a stage mum, always pushing her to do more and to take auditions and just to be in front of the camera. Now, Maria herself had a meeting with a psychic when she was younger, and she had a chilling prediction for her. The psychic told her her second child would be famous, but she also gave her a chilling warning: beware of dark water. As the psychic predicted, Natalie did grow up to be very well known. She became a professional actress, even nominated for an Oscar when she was a teenager. She was living the high life and even dated Elvis Presley. She was then on and off with a man named Robert Wagner. They married, divorced, and then got married again after a short period of time. They even then went on to have a child together. It was a very rocky relationship, even more so when rumours started spiralling that Natalie might be seeing another man. This was one of her colleagues, Christopher Walken. On the 28th of November 1981, Natalie and her husband invited Christopher on a boat trip with them. The trip would end up being deadly. Now, the exact events of the evening are unknown, but police believe it went something like this. Natalie is thought to have gone to bed on the boat. Her husband claimed that he was up chatting with Christopher and then went to bed too and noticed Natalie wasn't there. She'd seemingly disappeared, and so had a dinghy from the side of the boat. The morning after, the authorities made a terrible discovery. They found 43-year-old Natalie's body floating deceased. She was around a mile away in the water. She was wearing just her nightie and socks. Now, they deemed her death to be an accidental drowning, but suspicions were growing. Her autopsy confirmed she had a mark on her cheek and several bruises all over her body. Some believe that this indicated there'd been a fight. Some people, though, think she got the injuries falling overboard. Things went quiet for years, and then there was a startling revelation in 2011. The captain of the boat, Dennis, admitted that he neglected to tell police a few things about the trip. He said that Natalie's husband accused her multiple times of flirting with Christopher, and it caused a lot of arguments. He said one argument even ended with a glass being thrown at the wall, but he couldn't remember who threw it. He also chillingly claimed that the night Natalie vanished, he overheard a big argument and then suddenly everything went silent. The captain also claimed that Robert had acted suspiciously when he realised that Natalie had vanished. He apparently told the others on board not to call for help because he didn't want to cause a commotion and bring about unnecessary attention. It wasn't until hours later, at around 1:30 in the morning, that he finally raised the alarm. Natalie's family told officers that she was very afraid of the sea and she would never have put herself in the position to be kind of dangling over the edge of the boat where she could have fallen overboard. The case was reopened in 2011 and the death certificate was actually changed. This was from accidental drowning to drowning and undetermined factors. It's reported that although Robert was named as a person of interest, he was never officially classed as a suspect, and he hasn't sort of talked openly in interviews or anything about Natalie's death.
To be recently added the new Irish found footage horror movie Glenarma tapes, so I decided to check it out. The film tells us 4 students and 2 teachers went missing in the Glenarma woods, but only one was found badly injured. We then see what happens to the group via the recordings one of the students was making for his final year project. The first 40 minutes or so of this before they get to the woods was pretty enjoyable. Our little group were all likeable, and the banter between them was watchable and believable. Then when we get to the woods in the horror section, this film kinda lost me. It just wasn't interesting enough to keep my attention, which is a shame as they'd put in work giving me characters to care for, but the big bad in this movie was just sort of generic and dull. Then after an hour, the movie just dragged as more and more stuff is revealed, and I thought this movie was never going to end. My favourite activity during this was watching the Tubi subtitles fighting for their life as they are trying to understand what the Irish people were saying. I'll give it its dues that the film looked really good, and there wasn't really camera glitches or loud effect scares, so kudos for that, but ultimately it was just a totally okay found footage horror movie.
September 14th, 2020. At around 8 p.m., a Chinese vlogger by the name of Lamu went live. And she was in the kitchen of her dad's house. She's wearing her traditional Tibetan clothes and she looks very happy. As usual, she's kind of one of like those wholesome vloggers. She's lip syncing to songs. She's interacting with her viewers. She's whispering, I have to stay in the kitchen because my father and my brother-in-law are upstairs sleeping. So I'm trying to keep it down. I don't want to scream too much. And for the next few minutes, everyone is smiling while they're watching her. See, Lamu was kind of a lot of people's comfort vlogger. She was a safe space for most people. She was one of the wholesome ones on the internet. And so all of her live streams, all of her videos, her overall presence online just brought a lot of peace to those that were watching. But this one would be very different because it would be her very last live stream. Only a couple minutes after the live stream started, a lot of the viewers had heard this very loud bang from off screen. And Lamu looked up. She looks immediately alarmed. You can see that on the camera. And viewers are tuning into the live. They could sort of hear these heavy footsteps on the wood floor, and Lamu jumps up, knocking her phone flat off the tripod. So the screen goes dark. You can't see anything, but the live was not disconnected. So you can still hear everything that's going on. There's some sort of tussle. People are confused, and there's this sound of water or some sort of liquid that was pouring around. Lamu is heard screaming, "Help! Murder! Help!" Then there were more footsteps just thumping down the stairs, and you can hear her scream, "Appa, run! He's gonna make me explode! Brother-in-law, stay away! He poured gasoline all over me and he's about to light it!" Then the viewers hear a very slight, barely there, click, and this loud crackling noise, and it sounds like a fire. Lamu is screaming again, and this time from pain. Then the live stream cuts. All of her viewers were shocked. I mean, this doesn't even seem real. If this were any other internet personality, they would take this as a joke. A few days later, news came out. Lamu's house had been destroyed in a fire that was supposed to take the lives of all 3 residents. When the fire rescue got to the scene, Lamu's body, they only knew it was a person because of the shape of how she was found. Her skin had basically charred into the wooden floor, but she was still alive.
What?
She had severe burns on 90% of her body. She was alive. And so was her family. They had managed to escape and they hadn't been seriously hurt, but the killer escaped as well. So now everyone has the question of, well, first and foremost, is Lamu gonna survive? Is she gonna make it? And was this person someone she knew? Was this someone that watched her? Was it like a creepy stalker? Was it a viewer? Why would someone do this to let alone anyone, but why would they do it to this wholesome, beloved, kind blogger from China?
There's this other guy that has autism and he's gone viral in Instagram because he'll take photos of basketball players in NBA, thousands of them. He'll take a picture of like just them playing basketball, whatever, motion or position or posture they're in, and then finds an exact replica in Renaissance paintings.
Whoa.
What?
And there's hundreds and thousands of these photos. He is just such a, he has the mind that just can look at a picture and like, oh, that's that painting, that'll look comparable, and it's the exact same pose, the exact same posture, and he just does them side by side on the carousel on
That's
Instagram.
dope.
And it's wild, man. I don't understand how
photographic memory is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, not even photographic though. Like it's photographic, but like on top of that, it's like the recall, the comparison, be able to see it like in basketball, but then something completely different art.
Dude, that's
wild.
That was one of the reels I was thinking about using. Have you seen like the levels of imagination that people have?
Oh, like picturing a red apple and stuff? Yeah.
I think that's crazy that someone can't even picture anything but the word apple.
Yeah.
Hi loves, kung nagustuhan mo yung horror movie na Maryann, sa tingin ko maiintriga ka rin dito sa Beazle. Beazle yung pangalan ng bulag na witch na nakatira sa bahay na through the years ang daming namatay. Ang daming nagtataka kung bakit ang daming namatay sa bahay na yon, and it turns out Beazle is behind all the deaths. Ang pinakahuling pinatay ni Beazle ay yung asawa ng lalaking nakatira doon sa bahay. So from the trailer, the husband wanted to reveal kung ano nga ba yung totoong dahilan kung bakit maraming namamatay sa bahay na yon, including his wife. He hired a videographer named Apollo to help him document everything that's inside the basement of the house. And it's so creepy because as it turns out, the husband was working for Beazle. All this time, it was the husband luring the prey sa basement para kay Beazle. At yung pinakabagong prey na iaalay niya kay Beazle, yung videographer na hinire niya. I swear, it's so messed up. I'm not sure if the husband was possessed by Beazle, or baka all this time, he's also an immortal working for her. Talk about high-level betrayal. Akala ni Apollo nandun sila to document whatever sinister thing is inside the house. Pero it turns out, siya pala yung biktima. The house existed for more than 60 years, but I think Beazle is much, much older than that. Sobrang takot yung mga batang lumapit sa house na yon, and it turns out it was for good reason. I'm just curious kung paano napunta si Beazle doon. Is she a demonic presence unleashed by the husband? Or all this time, Beazle and other witches were traveling underground. Because from the looks of it, the house exists in a suburban community. Basta yung vibe talaga na gine-give out nito is like the more sinister, creepier version of Barbarian. If you're into horror movies that feature really terrifying creatures like witches, I think Beazle is for you. Kapag napanood mo yung trailer, mako-curious ka talaga kung ano yung dynamics nila ng husband. My gosh, itong si Beazle, dadagdag na naman siya sa mga kakatakutan natin. May bagong character na ma-unlock sa mga nightmares natin. And I think this will be gory and bloody because the creators of Beazle are also the same creators that gave us Terrifier. You know that film na marami ang nasuka at nahimatay. Hopefully, we get to watch Beazle in Philippine cinemas and other streaming platforms available to us. Na-curious ako and I'd love to watch it.
Eesh, that's a 12 head if I've ever seen one. Ugh. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Maryann Perez. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Maryann Perez was a 33-year-old mother living in Chalmette, Louisiana. On the night of March 25th, 1976, Mary wanted to go out and have some fun, have a few drinks with some friends. So she asked her oldest daughter if she could watch the younger kids, and then Mary left and went out. She said she would call around 10 or 11 p.m., which as a matter of fact, she did, and she told her oldest daughter, I'll be home shortly. But shortly never came. At around 1:30 in the morning, the daughter got a phone call from a woman named Dorothy. Said that her mother was having some car troubles, but she would be home soon. But again, soon never came. Mary's brother, Wayne, said that he did not recognize the name Dorothy as anyone that his sister knew, or that he knew. He felt something was off. He also was like, well, her car is actually brand new. She had just gotten it, and he couldn't imagine it already had car trouble. So they found out that Maryann had gone to a bar, I guess on the outskirts of New Orleans. And then once police get involved, they go to the bar and they find, this is a recreation, Mary's car in the parking lot. However, there is no signs of foul play, there's no blood, no broken windows, and the car actually is in perfectly working condition. It did not have any trouble. But where was Mary? 3 days later, in Lake Pontchartrain, a woman's purse is found submerged in the water and someone had weighed it down with a big brick. Turns out that purse was Maryann Perez's. But again, no sign of Mary. And sadly, it just goes cold almost right away. And then, in 1985, police get some new information. The detective working her case was called out to visit an inmate in Kansas. The man was gross. The man was named David Courtney. David Courtney is an alleged serial killer who actually basically described one of his victims as someone bearing a very strong resemblance to Maryann Perez. The detective who came from Louisiana to talk to him in Kansas, well, he was told by David Courtney that on that night he had driven up to the bar and he saw a woman coming out. The woman was stumbling around and trying to get into her car. She looked intoxicated. He offers to give her a ride home. But first he had to pick up his wife, which was down the street at work, and then they would bring her back to Chalmette, Louisiana, because they said, well, we're from there too, so we'll just drop you off. In actuality, they ended up bringing Maryann back to their apartment, where she was intoxicated and she passed out. David's wife, Donna, she apparently tried to make sexual advances on Maryann as Maryann was sleeping, but Maryann woke up and was like, whoa, what's going on here? So the couple agreed to then take Mary home. Well, that's what they told her. David would relate to this detective that he had already killed a few women and he didn't want to be identified by Maryann. So as Donna drove the car, David Courtney would strangle Maryann in the car, killing her. They then just dumped her body. And it was somewhere near the Louisiana-Mississippi border, possibly the Louisiana-Alabama border. He couldn't really recall. Now, all of his other so-called victims, their bodies were found where he said they were. But this being now 10 years after the fact-ish, Police went to that location where he said they dumped Mary's body, but she wasn't there. David Courtney ends up being convicted of at least one murder, and he is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. His wife Donna was also convicted of similar crimes. She was released in 1988, and her parole period ended in 1998. And then sometime after that, very soon after she was paroled, she died. Well, it wouldn't be until 2017 when they finally found Mary. Roughly 8 months after Mary disappeared, there was a human body found by a couple of hunters, and that was on Old Pascagoula Road in Grand Bay, Alabama, right on the border, in the location-ish as to where David Courtney said they dumped Mary's body. However, with this being 1976, we didn't have the, communication like this that we have now, so they weren't able to link this Jane Doe to this missing woman from another state. They even made recreations of what this woman looked like, but they never got leads from it. And it was actually just by chance that they even found out that that body was Mary's, because the detectives were working another cold case of another discarded body of a woman, and they thought, oh, maybe that body was connected to this body, but they weren't. However, at that point, everything is digitalized, and there's, you can find cases from other states, and that's how they linked their Jane Doe to Maryann Perez. They then confirmed that her skull had injuries consistent with a car accident because she had been in a car accident just before her disappearance. The body they found also had some partial dental plates, which Maryann also had. And so by 2017, they're able to get DNA from those remains, and they are able to finally confirm that Jane Doe body was in fact Maryann Perez. And she was in the general area of where David Courtney said he dumped her body. David Courtney is still in prison for his other murders. At this point, he has yet to be charged with the murder of Maryann Perez. And I'm not sure if charges are ever going to come forward or not. I don't know. It may have taken several decades, but her family finally found her, and were finally able to lay her to rest. And let this case be a great example to those of you who maybe have missing loved ones out there. Even a case back in 1976 where technology was not at all a thing, forensics was very new. Even cases like that are now being solved all these decades later. So this is a wonderful example of please don't give up hope. Your loved one can be found and will be found. And hopefully that also means justice can be served.
These are 5 secret messages sent by hostages that saved their lives. Number 3, Pizza Hut SOS. A lady named Cheryl Treadway was held hostage by her crack-crazed boyfriend, Ethan Nickerson, who was also being angry and violent and sharpening a knife continuously in front of her. But after a while, Cheryl convinced Nickerson to let her order a pizza using the Pizza Hut app. And when checking out, she added to the delivery instructions, please help, get 911 to me, and 911 hostage help. The crazy thing is, the Pizza Hut employees saw her order and recognized her as a regular, which made them double-check the bill, and then of course see the message and call the police, which is one hell of a loyalty benefit. Number 2, the secret police phone call. In May 2010, a woman was kidnapped by a man that she thought was a friend in his car on the west side of Utah Lake. He offers her a drink of what she thinks is vodka, but she immediately passes out and wakes up naked with the kidnapper. As he started driving her to who knows where, she convinced the captor to let her call her sister, but instead called 911. The dispatcher played along as the woman's sister, but only by asking yes or no questions. Eventually, the police located the vehicle and the woman was rescued, and the kidnapper, Jake McCann, was arrested. Number 1, the Colombian hostages that were rescued by a pop song. In 2010, deep in the Colombian jungle, the anti-government communist militia, the FARC, took countless hostages and held them in terrible conditions. Now, the Colombian army needed to communicate with the hostages somehow to let them know they were going to be saved. So they called an ad executive, Juan Carlos Ortiz, who's a sort of Colombian Don Draper type. Ortiz helped craft a pop song titled Better Days with a hidden Morse code message. 19 people rescued, you are next, don't lose hope. The song was played countrywide on government-controlled radio stations and reached the ears of the hostages without arousing the suspicion of their captors.
This man was making his way to his morning prayers when he was targeted and fatally beaten by 2 racists. I'm True Crime Caitlin, and this is the murder of Mushin Ahmed. Today's case takes place in Rotherham, South Yorkshire in 2015. Mushin is 81 years old and happily retired. He loved to spend time with his wife, his children, and his 12 grandchildren. He was a very loving and family-oriented man. People who knew him would describe him as kind, gentle, well-respected, well-mannered, and someone who always had a smile on his face. In the early hours of the 10th of August 2015, it was between 3 and 3:30 a.m, Mushin had left the house and was walking to his local mosque so that he could attend morning prayers. Of course, he was dressed in his traditional clothing for this. It was while on this walk that Mushin would be followed by a group of men, two of these men being 30-year-old Dale Jones and Damien Hunt. Dale and Damien had spent the whole previous night and most of that day drinking alcohol and abusing drugs. Dale specifically had took it a step further. That day, the day before Mushin is being followed to the mosque, Dale had got into an argument with his girlfriend's son's dad and threatened to kill him. After this, he stormed out of the house and seemingly just went on a bender. Mere minutes before seeing Mushin, Dale and Damien were in a taxi that was being drove by an Asian man, and for absolutely no reason, they began to verbally abuse and call this man disgusting racial slurs. I believe that they were kicked out of this taxi, and then it's only a couple of minutes later that they had spotted Mushin dressed in his traditional clothing walking to the mosque to attend his morning prayers, and they began to follow him. Dale and Damien began verbally abusing, shouting at Mushin, calling him racial slurs, and Mushin was just completely brushing it off, completely ignoring them. It was likely that this reaction from Mushin further angered Dale and Damien because they weren't getting the kick out of being cruel that they had wanted. This is when they made the completely false assumption based off of nothing that Mushin was a groomer, that he was a paedophile, and they used this reason, this false assumption, as a good enough reason to launch an attack on Mushin, a man who was 51 years older than them. Damien would push Mushin to the floor and punched him so hard in the face that his dentures broke. Dale continued the assault, kicking Mushin in the face several times with so much force that he had actually left an imprint of his trainer on Mushin's face. After they were satisfied that they had beaten Mushin enough, Dale and Damien fled. They washed off their bloody clothing and then went on about their day trying to establish alibis. Damien decided to go fishing. At around 5:25 a.m, a person who was out walking found Mushin, who was lay in agony on some grass. And it was clear from just looking at him that he had been the victim of a ferocious attack. This person then managed to flag down a passing police car and Mushin was rushed to the hospital. Here it was found that Mushin had sustained fractured eye sockets, a broken nose, a broken jaw, and had brain damage. He would sadly pass away 11 days later, succumbing to his injuries. Police were able to track down and find their suspects due to key evidence. Mushin's broken dentures had been recovered and they had blood on them. From this blood, they were able to extract a DNA profile, which led police to Damien Hunt. CCTV that they were able to recover from around the area of the attack and around the time of the attack helped police narrow down who else was in the area at that time, and this is how they linked Dale Jones. Some other men were arrested too, but they were later released without charge. Like I say, it was a group of men that had followed Mushin, but I guess it was found through evidence that it was only these two that participated in the assault which led to Mushin's death. During questioning, Damien tried to deflect any and all blame. When asked about his bloody knuckles, he said that he had sustained the bloody knuckles after he had punched a lamppost. However, with the evidence stacking up against him, Damien eventually cracked. He admitted that he did punch Mushin, but apparently it was accidental. He had only punched Mushin after he was trying to get Dale off of him. That was his story anyway. During questioning, Dale would only reply no comment to anything that he was asked. At Sheffield Crown Court in February 2016, Dale Jones was found guilty of murder and was handed a life sentence with a minimum of 32 years to serve. Damien Hunt was found guilty of manslaughter. He was cleared of murder and was handed a 14-year sentence.
Wow, I really love horror movies. They're just so great. Have you seen a Serbian film? Yeah, actually, I have, and that was a one and done for me. I have no intention of ever watching it again, and I would never recommend it to anybody living on this earth. It's my favorite movie. Okay, yeah, that is actually highly concerning for legal purposes. It's a political film. It has a deep meaning. No, yeah, I actually am one of the people that understands the argument of it being a political film because it's quite literally made to represent how the Serbian government fucks you from the moment you're born. But they just did that in the most horrific way possible, and I don't think people should, like, see those images more than once, if even once, in their life. Okay, you're scaring me a little bit. I've seen it 47 times. Okay, I'm calling the police.
Blumhouse movies used to be so good, I literally don't know what happened to them. Welcome back to part 129 of my series, watching every horror movie of 2024. Today's movie is Afraid. This came out in theaters today, August 30th. Afraid is about this family who is trying out this new AI system called Aya because of the husband's job, and while it seems very life-changing at first, it starts to take this very dark, menacing turn. Short and sweet and to the point, this movie was bad. The one positive thing I will give this movie is I really did like the cast, and I thought that the performances were all good. Even the little kids, they were pretty believable in this movie. And there was maybe like one or two eerie, creepy, shadowy moments where I was like, oh, okay, that was okay. But everything else just felt completely uninspired, unfortunately. The story like makes sense in the beginning and you know where it's going, but there is one very specific moment in the movie where it just completely goes off the rails and you're like, what is actually happening right now? And the dialogue in this movie is so unbelievably unnatural. Like, nobody talks like this. And I know everybody is going to make this joke, but honestly, it's so very true. It does feel like an AI wrote this movie. And it had this whole family drama angle that Blumhouse seems to be doing lately, and it just was very cheesy. But there were times that I did laugh. I will give it that. I don't think it was supposed to be a funny part, but it did tickle me. Overall, I give Afraid a 3.5 out of 10. I don't necessarily recommend this one. It wasn't really good, but if you've seen it, let me know what your thoughts are in the comments. I'm curious.
Tubi has an amazing selection of horror movies, so here are 3 to add to your list if you haven't seen them yet. The Awakening was released in 2011. This one is so underrated. Check this one out immediately if you haven't seen it. A woman who's a very skeptical ghost hunter ends up finding some unexplainable things happening at this boarding school. Just watch it. I promise you will not be disappointed. Red State was another one that was released in 2011. If you loved Waco, if you love a good cult movie, this one's gonna be for you. A group of teens think that they are gonna get lucky with this girl, but they end up walking themselves into a trap and they get kidnapped by this church cult. I promise, it's worth the watch. 2016, we were introduced to Terrifier, and this one is definitely my favorite slasher. A clown terrorizes a county on Halloween in the most sadistic and sickest ways possible. I just love a good origin story, and this one has some really solid kills. And the 3rd Terrifier movie is actually coming out very soon, so yeah, you need to catch up. Anyways, if you're new here, my name is Michaela. I love horror movies, so make sure you're following me so you don't miss out on another movie recommendation.
Do you like documentaries? I do too. Here's a few more true crime documentaries you need to watch. First up, I've got Abducted in Plain Sight. Simply one of the strangest, wildest, most frustrating documentaries that I've ever watched. As the title suggests, it does cover some child abduction themes. It's not super violent or gory. It is disturbing, but it's going to blow your mind. And these parents might be the worst parents in the history of human civilization. Another one that blew my mind was American Nightmare. I have to be honest, when I first started watching this, I did not believe what was happening. It is one of the craziest things that's probably ever happened in true crime history. Like, it actually doesn't make any sense that the story is real. And as it unfolds, your mind is going to be blown. And finally, one that I haven't stopped thinking about since I watched it, Who Took Johnny? This one also covers child abduction in the case of Johnny Gosch, who's been missing for I think like 40 or 50 years now. And it starts out as a very straightforward child abduction mystery, trying to figure out what happened to this poor kid and potentially other kids in the area. And it quickly takes a much darker turn. It does kind of get into conspiracy territory a little bit, but it backs it with evidence. So I really didn't know what to believe when it was over. It's a very compelling, sad, and potentially disturbing documentary if everything that's said in it is true.
Let's cut right to the chase. Strange Darling is one of my favourites, if not my actual favourite movie of this year. I'm not going to give a plot summary because this movie works best of all when you know very little about it. All I'll say is Kyle Gallner is one of the best actors working currently. And Willa Fitzgerald, I owe you an apology. I wasn't really familiar with your game. One of the best performances I've seen in a long time, probably since Mia Goth in Pearl. If Strange Darling is playing near you, Go and see it as soon as you can. If it's not playing near you, I don't know, petition your cinema or something.
If you look closely at this image, it's probably one of the most disturbing you'll ever see. This student was found dead, wrapped in a gym mat, and police say it wasn't suspicious. This is the unsettling case of Kendrick Johnson. 17-year-old Kendrick Johnson was a student at Lowndes High School in Valdosta, Georgia. He was captured on his school CCTV system on the 10th of January 2013, heading towards the gymnasium. Strangely, the CCTV inside of the gym seems to skip. Now, Kendrick was actually marked absent for the rest of the day at the classes he was supposed to attend after he just never showed up. Alarm bells rang for his family after he also failed to turn up home from school that day. Kendrick's poor mum searched for 2 hours for Kendrick but could absolutely not find him anywhere. She then obviously rang police and told them of her concerns. The following day, students at the school noticed what they thought was a sock sticking out of a gym mat. On further inspection, they found something that would absolutely haunt them for the rest of their lives. It was Kendrick's body wrapped up inside of the mat. Police showed up but very quickly seemed to come to the conclusion that this was some sort of accident. They claim that he had probably fallen in reaching to get something, as many students were known to kind of store stuff in the gym mats and then retrieve it afterwards. They stated there was nothing suspicious about the death and wanted to just kind of quickly move on from it, it seemed. However, Kendrick's family really just felt like there was more to this story than met the eye. Kendrick's shoulders were a lot broader than the hole in the mat, suggesting that it just wouldn't be easy for him to just slip inside it unwillingly. His arms were also by the side of him when he was found, and surely if he was reaching for something and fell, they wouldn't be by his side. Then more heartbreaking revelations. Kendrick's family were eventually allowed to see his body and they were absolutely horrified by what they saw. You can actually see the images on Google and it is really, really horrifying. So if you don't want to see that, please do not Google Kendrick Johnson because you probably will see something that you don't want to see. His body was covered in bruises and scratches, and it was also discovered that he suffered blunt force trauma. Why would this be the case if he'd simply fallen inside of the mat? It was also discovered that Kendrick allegedly suffered racially motivated attacks prior to his death, so some theorized that this could have been a motive for people to want to kill him. An independent pathologist later conducted an autopsy and stated the cause of death was unexplained apparent non-accidental blunt force trauma. In 2022, a second local investigation was closed with no charges filed. A county sheriff called the death a, quote, weird accident and insisted that nothing criminal had happened.
About 2,000 people storm in, and they storm into RG car near the protest, and they destroy the hospital. Many doctors, healthcare workers shared the sentiment of netizens, which is, she was our sister. We cannot let her blood be wasted. Groups have rallied on the streets to peacefully protest. They called it Reclaim the Night. They marched shoulder to shoulder, and this is the night before India's Independence Day. Hundreds of doctors took to streets with signs, justice delayed is justice denied, no safety, no duty, let doctors heal, not deal with violence, we want justice, doctors save lives, let's save theirs. One doctor said, it's a girl who has been raped and murdered in her own safe space. This is not okay. So first, it starts with this candlelit protest by women and men, all holding candles, protesting, seeking justice, demanding answers, young people seeking answers from the government. There were candles everywhere. Until there weren't. About 2,000 people storm in, and they storm into RG car near the protest, and they destroy the hospital.
2,000 people?
There's not a direct number. It seems to be about 2,000. Some reports say anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000 men, primarily, come in, they break up the protest, storm into the hospital, smashing chairs, tables, breaking windows, flipping over police cars, ransacking the entire emergency department of RG car. It's really bad. Literally nothing is left unturned. Everything is smashed. Police come in, they tear gas the whole place. The mob destroys the emergency department, the back staff rooms, the changing rooms for nurses, the pharmacy. They also destroyed a big portion of the seminar hall where the crime took place, allegedly. Almost all the CCTV cameras were broken. Now, this is where it gets weird. Who are these people?
Yeah.
What are they doing? It doesn't even make any sense. Many netizens believe it was in an effort to destroy evidence.
Reports of a mysterious bearded man plagued a community after a schoolgirl vanished. When the truth was revealed, it was more horrific than the locals could ever have imagined. It was the 18th of November, 1993. Angie Housman was in 4th grade, living in St. Louis in Missouri. It should have been a normal afternoon as Angie made her way off the school bus back home. Unfortunately, it was the last journey she would ever take. She vanished off the school bus just 8 houses away from her home. Tragically, her body was then discovered 9 days later by a deer hunter. Horrifically, she'd been tied to a tree alive and left there to die. Her autopsy, though, revealed something even more hideous. Experts revealed she'd been kept alive for an entire week and endured torture and before actually passing away. Now, forensic experts collected evidence from the crime scene. This was things such as a fingerprint on the duct tape left on Angie's body. They also collected a DNA profile from her underwear. Now, eyewitnesses reported seeing a mysterious bearded man around the area just prior to her disappearance. However, searches for the mystery bearded man proved fruitless. The case went frustratingly cold until 25 years later. Thanks to advances in DNA technology, in March 2019, a lab tested the DNA found in the case. They uploaded the profile to a national database, and this time they got a match. Culprit was 61-year-old Earl Webster Cox. He was local to the area at the time of Angie's disappearance and murder. Interestingly, he'd actually previously been dishonorably discharged from the Air Force due to S activity with 4 different children. He'd only had to spend 8 years in prison before he was released. He then moved to Missouri and was again arrested for child abuse in 1992. He also pleaded guilty in 2003 for trying to entice a child over state lines for S activity. He also pleaded guilty to having over 45,000 images of child SA on his computer. How this man was free to then SA and kill Angie is absolutely mind-boggling. After his DNA was found on Angie's underwear, he was charged with murder, kidnapping, and sodomy. He pleaded guilty and was given life in prison.
The year was 1999. The movie was a low-budget anthology starring a horror legend. The studio behind that movie? Well, Troma, of course. And the horror legend? None other than Leatherface himself, Gunnar Hansen. I'm Ian Van Gool, your horror movie hype man. We're on our way to 10K followers, so if you love horror movies, smash that follow button. And today, we're talking about Hell Block 13. In a haunted death row cell block, a deranged female serial killer reads a trio of twisted tales to her executioner. So I had no idea that this movie even existed before today. The combination of a late 90s anthology starring Gunnar Hansen piqued my interest, and I had to check it out. Then when that opening Troma logo popped up on the screen, I knew I was in for a good time. So even though this was released in 1999, it feels very early 90s. It consists of 3 stories: Watery Grave, White Trash Love Story, and Big Rhonda. And of course, there's the wraparound story that stars Gunnar Hansen as the executioner. If you're familiar with Troma movies, then you have an idea of what to expect with this one, although it does feel a little more tame than usual. But the stories are entertaining, the acting is acting, and the makeup and effects are done pretty well. Unfortunately, it's not a splatterfest or overly bloody and gory, but I thought it was a fun anthology and pretty entertaining overall. If you want to check out Hell Block 13, then you can find it on Prime Video or Tubi. If you've seen it, then let me know what you think of it. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
These are the 5 most disgusting crimes committed by actors. Number 5, Mark Wahlberg. As a teenager, Mark Wahlberg committed several racially motivated hate crimes. At 15, him and his friends threw rocks at black children. And then at 17, under the influence of PCP, Wahlberg attacked 2 separate Vietnamese men, calling one a racial slur and beating him with a stick until it broke. And then later punched another man in the eye, supposedly blinding him. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, but only served 45 days. Number 4, Woody Allen. In the 1980s, Woody Allen entered into a relationship with the actress Mia Farrow. Mia Farrow had 7 children, both biological and adopted, and they were together for 12 years while they both raised Farrow's children. However, in 1992, Mia Farrow called it off when she found a stack of nude photographs that he had taken of her 21-year-old adopted daughter. Later in the same year, a daughter of Woody Allen and Mia Farrow came forward with an allegation of molestation that took place when she was 7. That claim's highly contested, but regardless, soon after the allegation, Woody Allen and his ex's adopted daughter, who he raised, went public. She was 21 years old, he was 57.
Did you know that in 30 Days of Night, the town of Barrow that they're in reality doesn't actually see the sun for about 70 days? Now you know.
Fright Fest starts today in London, and I'm lucky enough to be covering this festival remotely. There looks like there's going to be some incredible films on show this year, and here are 5 that I'm really looking forward to. The Invisible Raptor, a horror comedy revolving around an invisible raptor. Of course I'm going to watch this. I'm hoping for some goofy fun. The Demon. Look at this poster. And then look at this movie still. I am 100% all in just from these pictures. Bogeyville. A new vampire movie where it looks like the vampires are actually brutal. It's been so long since we've had a vampire movie like that, and I am so invested. Strange Darling. Kyle Gallner can do no wrong in my eyes, and I just know this film is likely to be my favourite from the festival. If there's any film that's going to challenge it for that #1 spot, however, it's going to be Azrael. Samara Weaving in a post-apocalyptic world is just a recipe for greatness. A huge thank you to Fright Fest for this opportunity, and if you're in the area, I highly recommend checking this festival out.
So I'm going to start doing some in-depth breakdowns of horror movies or disturbing films. I've just realised that my shirt's inside out. Fuck it, we move on. There's a bunch of films that I want to return to, do more in-depth reviews, which would involve me spoiling the film. But I know that there's a bunch of you out there who follow me who have told me that you are interested in these films, but you can't bring yourself to watch them. So leave me some suggestions in the comments for films you want me to break down, films you want me to spoil. In the meantime, I'm going to return to some of the more brutal films I've talked about, spoil them, go into detail, so, you know, you don't have to watch them if that's your thing. See you later. Why is my shirt inside out?